Bismillah walhamdulillah wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah. Amma ba'd. Assalamu alaikum. My name is Dyaa. I am the operations director for CAIR New Jersey. This is brother Ramin. He is the staff attorney at CAIR New Jersey. So alhamdulillah, it's been a while. We were here a year ago. It's good to have an update, a refresher on this critical information.
If you want to use this one or this one. If you want to use this one, you have to put it on the Otherwise, you're going to use
This one's okay?
Yeah.
Is it okay? Okay. طيب. Thank you.
Sisters are downstairs. They won't hear with any other mic.
What?
Sisters are downstairs, so with that mic, this will connect it.
So this is good. This is better.
This is good.
Okay, so alhamdulillah, it's good to be here for a refresher on this information. And there have been changes, right? It's been a whole year. Things are going on, right? Trump's in office. You see ICE in the news. So we are here tonight, inshallah, to talk about ICE and traveling. Why? Because we get these questions often the same time, or people mix these two questions together, but they're different. They're two different situations with very different implications, especially if you're a citizen or something else, right? So we're going to be talking about ICE, we're going to be talking about traveling, we're not going to be talking about divorce or real estate or, all the other stuff we don't do, okay? All right, let's get going. So, CAIR New Jersey. We enhance the understanding of Islam, we promote justice, and we empower American Muslims. That's what we try to do day in and day out, every single day. We are up against something that we call the Islamophobia Network. This number here, $1.5 billion, is based on research as of 2019. Right? It was a big project that CAIR put on at this time to expose a lot of organizations that are funded by Zionists, even Hindutva. And what do? They slander Islam and Muslims. Now, it's been quite a few years since then, but this is who we are up against. Organizations like the Investigative Project on Terrorism, right? They have these great names, or Middle East Forum. They have these really great sounding names, but who funds them? Who runs them? Not us, not Muslims, right? Certainly not us. That's what CAIR is up against. And, we're never going to have as much money as them, but we don't need it. We get success and quwwah from Allah Azza wa Jal. So, problem comes our way, right? And this is similar with ICE, this is with traveling. Any kind of problem comes our way, right? There's so many different problems. What do? How do we challenge Islamophobia? How do we challenge this? So, some problems get different outcomes, or they have different methods of addressing them. For example, maybe a problem is just stemming from ignorance or misunderstanding. Okay, well, we need to do some education. Maybe there's fear or hatred. All right, let's push this in the media. Let's get the community involved. Maybe there's discrimination or civil rights abuse or violence. Now we need to do some creative advocacy. Now we need to maybe consult with elected officials. Now we need to really raise awareness and do a whole host of other things. Every community needs masajid, like where we are right now, schools, charities, Muslim-run halal businesses, and an institution that protects them. And not just the institutions, but the people, us, the community. That is the role that CAIR serves. So, our bread and butter is the civil rights work. Our civil rights and legal department counsels, mediates, and advocates on behalf of Muslims and others who have experienced religious discrimination, defamation, job discrimination, or hate crimes. We work to protect and defend the constitutional rights of American Muslims. We do government affairs work. This is also very important. These are some examples. We go down to Trenton. We go down to Washington, D.C. every year. You're welcome to join us. There is CAIR in these efforts. And we also do media work. We launch press releases constantly. You can go on our website. You can see what are we doing? What are we commenting on? Press conferences, interviews, op-eds, television appearances. Why? Who else is going to do it for the community? Promptly and professionally. We can't wait on volunteers to do it next week. We need to do it now. If we don't tell our story, they're going to tell our story for us. So now we're going to get into the beef of this evening. Disclaimer, this presentation provides general information, not legal advice. Policies and enforcement practices do change quickly, including in New Jersey and at the federal level. If you or a loved one is at risk, talk to an immigration attorney about your situation. And in general, if you are not a citizen, you should have some kind of relationship with an immigration attorney. That is the smart thing to do. So again, this is not legal advice. We're going to be covering these matters generally, inshallah. And later, when it comes time for public questions and answers, please frame your questions generally. Don't speak like I or my wife, or right. Keep it very general, and then afterwards too, inshallah, we'll be here to answer more questions. So I'm going to hand it off to Brother Ramin, our staff attorney.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Bismillah. So, as Brother Dyaa was saying, we're going to cover two main kind of areas. One is travel, right? So like interactions with Customs and Border Protection at the airports or on the border or other ports of entry. And then the other area is we're going to be, yes, okay. And the other area we're going to be talking about is ICE, right? So interaction with Immigration Customs Enforcement. Both of these agencies are parts of the Department of Homeland Security, so that's the broader umbrella agency, and then these other two agencies are part of it. And then, of course, another agency that's part of it is USCIS. You might have encountered them through kind of applications for immigration benefits, but we're not going to be talking about that today. We're going to be talking about these other two major agencies that are within DHS, namely CBP and ICE. So first we're going to talk about CBP in the context of travel. These are a few things that we've seen in the second Trump administration. So a lot of additional scrutiny for applicants for visas and other sorts of immigration benefits. A lot of issues with people at the border and at airports. A lot of extra questioning and screening, like the secondary screening areas where people get held back for extra questioning. They're a lot more busy. A lot more people being questioned, and things like that, right? So just a lot more aggressive ICE enforcement, as we've seen in Minnesota and other places like that. So it results in a lot more kind of uncertainty, more fear, and a lot more people being caught off guard. So that's why it's important to be prepared with information like these, like what we're about to share in this meeting. So what is CBP? CBP refers to the Customs and Border Protection. Like I said, it's part of DHS. So it operates at airports, borders, and ports of entry, and it controls who can enter into the United States, right? So you'll most commonly interact with them on an international flight, coming back into the country. You'll have to go through U.S. Customs, and you'll interact with one of the agents there. And so they have a lot of broad authority during travel, especially in international flights, like I mentioned. They often do a lot of questioning, searches, secondary screening, and unfortunately a lot of these practices tend to disproportionately affect Muslim travelers. And it creates a lot of uncertainty, when traveling, especially as a Muslim or someone perceived as Muslim. So deciding what to do before traveling often depends on your immigration status, right? So if you're a non-citizen, of course, it's important to consult an immigration attorney before traveling. General guidance that we've given is that in this time where it's very uncertain with the Trump administration, it's not clear, what's going to happen if you travel abroad. Will they let you back in? Will they not let you back in? Things like that. It's generally important. The safest option is to, avoid traveling abroad if it's possible. But if you absolutely need to travel abroad, it'd be important to speak with an immigration attorney. Carrying proper identification is important. Green card if you're a green card holder, of course your passport if you're a U.S. citizen, and other documents that you would need. And always carry emergency contact information, preferably for an attorney, or you can also contact us if you'd like to establish a relationship with us before your travel, and that would be useful in case you're ever get stopped for questioning or things like that, and want to share that with other people outside of the situation. So a big thing is when you're traveling with electronics, it's important to know what powers these agents have over these electronics. So they have a lot of broad authority to be able to take this device, to be able to search it, and copy the information that they find in it, right? So and this can be done even without a warrant signed by a judge, right? So they have authority to take these devices for pretty much any reason, so that's why it's always better to, if you don't want that to occur, it's always safer to avoid traveling with those electronic devices. But of course, in today's age, it's very difficult to do that. We always have to have kind of our smartphones, especially when we're going into these other countries and whatnot. So if you do choose to take take your electronic devices, whether it's the phone or the laptop, it's important to have a very strong password. A lot of times we have use our face to enter our phone, or we have a very short, like 4 or 5 digit, 6-digit number or something like that. It's important that before you enter airport security to have a very strong password activated on your phone, so that it just makes it harder for them to be able to access your phone. We've seen a lot of situations where people have the face unlock, and then the agent just takes their phone and puts it to their face. They unlocked it, they're able to get into their phone very easily. So that's why it's important to have strong protection. And it's important to note that a lot of people, they say, okay, what if I just delete these chats or delete this social media before I travel? Will that protect me? Oftentimes that doesn't really make a difference, because they have ways of uncovering the data that is on your phone, even if it's been deleted. So that's a important thing to know, that oftentimes deleting it won't help you. It's better to just make it harder for them to get access to it, either by not taking it at all or by having a very strong password protection. So if you're stopped for questioning at the airport or at the border or other places where you'll encounter where you're entering the country, CBP might ask about things that are generally related to your traveling, right? So they might ask, who are you, why were you traveling? Many of us have experienced this. They ask, what's the purpose of your trip? Where did you go? How long were you? And who did you stay with? Things like that. It's important to answer those questions truthfully, because lying to a federal agent is a crime. So it's best to so you should not, you might feel like, okay, if I tell them this, then it might cause suspicion. It's best to just be honest about your travels and not lie to them. But sometimes they ask questions more than or questions that don't have anything to do with your traveling, right? They might we've seen them ask about religious beliefs, about your political opinions, right? They might ask, are you? We've seen people, ask, are you Sunni or Shia? What masjid do you go to? Sometimes they ask them that. We advise in those situations to just say that you're not comfortable answering those questions because they're not related to the travel, right? So they're entering into territory that they're not authorized to get into. They're not supposed to be asking about your personal beliefs and things like that. They're supposed to only be talking about your travels, right? And perhaps like your status and things like that. So it's just the best thing to do is just say, if they start asking those inappropriate questions, say, I don't feel comfortable answering those questions. I don't want to answer those questions. If the questioning continues, you can ask to speak with an attorney. So this is why it's good to have that contact before traveling, because they may allow you to call them on the phone while you're in the secondary screening room. So another thing you'll face is, or potentially face is, searches of the belongings. Everything on your person is subject to search by CBP, right? So whether it's something on your physical body, whether it's in your luggage or whatnot, all of these things they're able to search without a warrant because of the special status of the border and how they're able to, they just have more powers than they would kind of within the country to search your belongings. If they ever take a device from you, or before we get into that, it's always important to, you can always ask them to search things in front of you so you can see what they're doing. If you're more comfortable with that, like having things be in front of you, because sometimes they like to take things into a hidden room somewhere. So you can always do that. You also should ask for a receipt if they take something from you, because that's something that they might do. They might, especially with devices, we've seen that happen. Unfortunately, it happens a lot to, people that they might suspect. They might take their electronic device. You can ask for a receipt. It's always important to remember as much information about the incident, like the badge number, the officer's name, things like that. And a good practice is after you're done with, if you ever experience this kind of questioning where they take you to the secondary screening area, usually it's like a separate kind of room where a lot of people are sitting and waiting to be questioned. It's good to, once you're done with that, to like write down what you remember about the incident, because all these details are important, because then they might help someone who's advocating for you in the future. It would help them have more information about the incident in case they do anything that's inappropriate or not goes beyond the scope of CBP. You're never required to provide passwords to your devices. They might tell you are. They might say, you have to tell us your password, or if you tell us if you give us your password, we're going to let you go. A lot of these are kind of strategies that they use to make it easier for them, so they can just take your password and get into your phone or laptop. So you're never required to do that. Now, it's kind of, more complicated if you're not a U.S. citizen. If you are a U.S. citizen, you're safe. You can just say, I don't want to give you my password. If you're not a U.S. citizen, maybe it's a bit more tricky, because then they might use that as some excuse to, cause more trouble for you. So for that situation, it's more of a gray area, and you have to use your best judgment. But if you are a U.S. citizen, you can always not give them the password, and you'll be safe. They can't prevent you from entering the country if you're a U.S. citizen. And yeah, like sometimes you unlock it for them, and they keep on questioning you for another hour, 2 hours. So it's not a guarantee that'll help the situation. Regarding searches of the person, you can always request that an officer of the same gender is the one that gives you the pat-down. You can ask for the pat-down to be in a private place. This might especially be more important for the sisters, like they may not want, a male officer or whatnot, and also if sometimes they might ask to, remove a hijab. So in that situation, you can ask to go to a private room and to have an officer of the same gender be the one doing the search. A lot of times people who experience the problems of secondary screening and extra searches and things like that are people who may be placed on a watch list. Unfortunately, these watch lists just pretty much almost entirely affect Muslims or people from Muslim countries. Of course, there's other people who aren't Muslim, but it's maybe overwhelming, big majority of the people on these watch lists are people who share our identity. So that's just something to note, that if you routinely experience these problems, you can contact an attorney. You can contact us, and there are methods that can be used to try to remove people from watch lists. It's sometimes it may not be successful, but it's always worth trying. So you should always go to get legal assistance if you suspect that you might be on one of these lists. And of course, immigration status is very important. Like I said with the questioning, if you're not a U.S. citizen, you may want to, disclose maybe you have less ability to not cooperate with them. If you're a green card holder, you can't stay more than 6 months out of the country. That's a requirement for the green card, is to not be out of the country for that long. And if you're on a visa, CBP has a lot of discretion whether to admit or deny people. We've seen it, especially in the Trump administration, a lot of denials or cancellation of visas kind of on the spot at the airport. So that's something to note. That's why we generally it's recommended not to travel in this time. But we understand if people have to do that, it's not like a guarantee that you're gonna have your visa canceled. That's probably most people won't experience that, but it's a risk, especially during the Trump administration. That's why we bring this up. And for people who don't have any status, so undocumented individuals, it's good to note that even when you're traveling within the country, you can still be detained, right? So even if you're on a domestic flight, that's why it's generally preferred to avoid any sort of air travel if you're without status. And so, like I mentioned, it's important to take down the badge numbers, names of the people who are, if they ever give you any problems, to take down the information about like the date and time, the location, if there's any people who witnessed it, like family members or things like that. You can file a complaint with what's called DHS TRIP, so it's the Travel Redress Inquiry Program. If you ever experienced any improper questioning or had your devices taken without any good reason, or you were denied boarding on your flight for no good reason, you can file a complaint with DHS TRIP. That's something that we also can help with if you need assistance, and there's also other organizations that can help with filing that complaint. It's just describing what happened to you, and then you submit it to DHS, and then they issue a redress number and respond with what, if there's any sort of redress to the situation, if there's any solution. So yeah.
So before we get into ICE, I just want to share a couple more tidbits about traveling, right? So just to recap that, if you're a citizen, they have to let you back in the country, okay? Right? They'll detain you maybe even for 6 hours. We've seen that plenty of times. But they have to let you back in eventually if you're a citizen, okay? Even if you have a green card, they're going to let you back in. Unless, of course, they want to charge you with a crime or something, but that's a whole different ordeal. Again, you can't be out of the country on a green card for more than 6 months. Unfortunately, if you're on any kind of visa, you're really at CBP's mercy at the airport. You're at their mercy. So we still have the general guidance or advice to not volunteer additional information. Or you got to answer questions: who are you? Why are you traveling? Where are you going? What do you have with you? What's your immigration status? You got to answer those kind of questions. Citizens, green card holders, then we say you don't need to answer anything else. I'm not comfortable answering that. I'm not comfortable, right? Just know, though, if you're a visa holder, it might be better to answer these questions, but you can do it in a different way. You can kind of filter your answers, because again, you're at their mercy. They could just reject you and they could send you out of the country. They might not let you back in. And why to not volunteer information? Oh, there was a brother who came our way. He worked at Newark CBP for like 20 years. Okay, he retired. They stopped him, and he thought, oh, they know me. We're cool. I worked here for 20 years. I'm innocent. I'm not a terrorist. I didn't do anything wrong. Here's my phone. Go ahead, right? They open his phone. They see stuff on WhatsApp, I don't know, pro-Palestine stuff, and they say, this is Hamas propaganda, and they keep his phone. And he was very embarrassed because he knew some of the people who still worked there, right? They knew him. He used to work there for 20 years, and he thought, so that's why we say don't volunteer information. Usually it doesn't help. It might not harm, but really it can only cause harm. It can either do nothing or cause harm. So it's usually best not to volunteer information.
Yeah, those are all good points. So now we can get into the ICE portion. So ICE refers to Immigration and Customs Enforcement, right? So like I said, they're a branch of DHS. They deal with all of the kind of arrests and raids and deportations and removal proceedings. So they kind of enforce immigration law within the country as opposed to, on the border. And they're, often their actions create fear, and this is, by design. It's very much intentional for them to act in a way that makes everyone else kind of afraid to live their lives in the way they otherwise would. So that's something to keep in mind, and we've definitely seen that in an extreme way in the past year or so. ICE has two kind of major components. One is enforcement and removal operations. They handle arrests, detentions, deportations, and then Homeland Security investigations. They handle, as the name suggests, investigations and sometimes criminal enforcement. Sometimes you don't really know who you're dealing with. When you see an ICE agent, you don't know if they're part of this part of the agency or that part. Sometimes they coordinate with local law enforcement, and so that's why it's like especially difficult, and especially when they don't have any badge, or when they have a mask on or things like that, or have their cars be unmarked. Right? These are strategies that they use to try to hide their identity and to cause more confusion. Right? So this is kind of what I was mentioning, right? So they often rely on surprise and confusion using unmarked cars, conducting collateral arrests. So what that means is like when they are targeting or looking for one person, but then they end up, arresting someone else that they find in the process. They often try to get information from police or from third parties. So that's why it's important, as we're going to get into later, it's important to try not to disclose any information about your immigration status to other people, because then they might, if they're not trustworthy, then they might, disclose that to ICE. And a key thing to remember is that ICE often relies on consent, right? If they try to get the permission of the person to enter their house or things like that, rather than having an actual warrant from a judge that would give them permission to enter someone's house or another private place like a business, masjid, things like that. And we're going to get into that in more detail about the issue of the warrants. So who's at risk? ICE claims that they target non-citizens, right, who are deportable, right, such as people who don't have status, people who violated their status, people who maybe they missed an immigration court date that they were supposed to go to. And they also say that they prioritize people with criminal convictions, or people who have like prior removal orders, or people who they think are, risks to national security. But in practice, ICE enforcement is impacting a lot more people. We've seen, people targeted as a result of a mistake or misidentification. They haven't been very careful with what they've been doing. Sometimes we've even seen U.S. citizens detained because they think they're someone else or whatnot, or maybe even as a strategy to, target people who are engaged in activism against ICE, or people who are giving them a hard time. So, even though a U.S. citizen cannot be deported, right, legally, we've unfortunately seen things like that happen, of like detention, even in rare cases, even deportation of some U.S. citizens because of a mistake or things like that. They don't believe that this person is actually a U.S. citizen, or that person is not able to give them any proof that they are a U.S. citizen. That's why, although a U.S. citizen doesn't have to carry around proof of their citizenship, right? You're not forced to have a passport in your pocket wherever you go. But it would be safe to, carry around some sort of proof of citizenship. If you've like encountered ICE before, if your neighborhood might have a lot of ICE presence, and you worry about that, you worry about them targeting you despite your being a U.S. citizen, you can always carry that proof of citizenship. It doesn't have to be a full passport. There's some things called a passport card. It can easily fit in a wallet, and it something you can order, and it has it demonstrates that you are a U.S. citizen. Some people, they also have like pictures of that, but that's a bit less believable for an ICE agent. It's less believable for them to show a picture, because that could easily be doctored. But the actual document, whether it's a passport or passport card, can't do that. And like I said, this is not required. It's just like an extra safe measure that you can take. So this is what I was mentioning earlier about the issue of consent and warrants. So in order to access a private place, so whether it's your home or a private business, this masjid is considered a private place, and other places like that. ICE needs, this applies to all law enforcement, but also applies to ICE, is that they either need a warrant that's signed by a judge that authorizes them to enter that place without needing permission, or they need consent of the inhabitants or owners of that place that's being searched. So if they have either of these two things, then they have access to the place, the private place. But what we see is that they rarely have a judicial warrant, right? They may have paperwork that has the word warrant on it, but this paperwork is typically not from a judge. It's not. Not signed by a judge. It's typically just from the agency itself or from someone at DHS who gives them a paper that says warrant for arrest of alien or something, and it doesn't actually give them permission to enter a place, but they just use it as a kind of way to trick people into making them think that they actually do have permission. So just to be clear, like only a warrant that's from a courthouse that's signed by a judge would give ICE the authority to enter a private place. And you should never assume that they have it. Always ask to see it. If they don't give it to you, ask again. Sometimes they refuse to do that. They try to argue with people. I've seen videos of encounters where they're like, oh, are you a lawyer? How do you know? What do you know about this stuff? But if you make sure that you keep on asking for that, and if they don't produce such a warrant, then they're not able to actually enter those private spaces. This might be hard to see for some people because it's kind of small, but this image shows the difference between ICE warrant and a judicial warrant. So on the left, it's very small, but on the top left corner it says U.S. Department of Homeland Security, right? And then the signature is just of an agent, right, in ICE or DHS. So there's no indication at all that this is from a judge. Doesn't have a judge's signature on it. It doesn't have any name of any courthouse or anything. It's just a warrant issued by the agency itself, right? Whereas the warrant on the right, it clearly says on the top, United States District Court. It tells you which district court it is. In this case, it's Eastern District of California. It says clearly search and seizure warrant. It specifies, what is being searched or seized. So it has to say, this address or this property is going to be taken. And then at the bottom, it has a judge's signature, right? So Edmund Brennan, U.S. Magistrate Judge, right? So this is very clear that this is an actual warrant that's signed by a judge. This is what's required by the Constitution to give law enforcement the ability to enter a private place without the permission of the person.
So we'll have to fix this. I mean, maybe in this screen it's hard to see, but again, they will try most of the time to use the thing on the left. It says DHS. If it doesn't say a court, it's not a judicial warrant. They can call it whatever they want. That's not a real warrant, okay? So make sure that the warrant has a court and then the signature. Who signed it? Oh, this person's a judge. That's important, right? If you don't see that court on it and it was signed by a judge, you can just disregard it. You don't need to let them come in or whatever. And this applies to your home. This applies to the masjid. This applies to a business too. We'll get more into that.
What if they break in the door, like we've seen them? They just break in the door? Of course.
If they don't have permission, if they don't have a warrant or they don't have permission, and they forcibly enter your home, that is illegal, right? And perhaps, if they do enough damage or cause enough harm, that there could be a basis for a litigation against them. But more importantly is that, if they were to ever, if they were to do that, if they were to illegally enter someone's home, any sort of evidence of a crime that they might find in that home would not be admissible in any criminal proceeding, right? So this is called the fruit of the poisonous tree, right? So any illegal action that results in evidence, that evidence is not admissible, right? So so unfortunately we've seen them do that. We've even seen situations where maybe they have a warrant, like a law enforcement agent might have, or officer might have a warrant, but they refuse to show it, and then so it's like, what do you do in that situation? Do you give them permission to enter? So because they're saying, if you don't let us in, we're going to break down your door. Do you open the door for them? Do you let them break down your door? That's just, something you have to decide for yourself in that moment. But, none of these things are, black and white. It's more complex. But generally speaking, you're not required to give them permission if they don't have the warrant. Yeah.
What happens most of the time is they have the one on the left that someone who works for them just signed, and most people see that and go, oh, this is serious, this is a warrant, okay, come in. Right? They don't challenge it. They're not looking for the judge's name, the judge's signature. They're not looking at the piece of paper. They see the piece of paper, it looks really official, and they let them in. That's usually what happens.
And sometimes, even if you tell them, show me a warrant, you don't have authority to come in, they might push really hard. They might say, what do you know? You don't know anything. You don't know the law. I know the law better than you. I'm coming in, or they'll say like, I actually do have permission to come in. And so then they might just push you really hard until you eventually decide, okay, I'm just going to let them in. So it's always important to make sure you know your rights. That's why we're here, right? So you can know that if they don't produce that judicial warrant, they can't be let in. And yeah, and that'll be hopefully the end of that, and they won't, they'll leave the situation. So a car is a little bit different. We've seen this frequently, ICE coming up to people in their cars. In this situation, to stop a car, law enforcement doesn't need a warrant. They need some sort of reason to stop it. In the case of like a regular police, they see someone speeding, okay, that's a reason to stop your car. In terms of ICE, they, have some reason to believe that there's a, person without status in that car, so that's why they might stop it. But in terms of whether they can search the vehicle, they generally need consent or a warrant, just like we discussed for the other places. They might ask for ID. Only the driver is required to give ID in that situation. The passengers can always ask, am I free to leave? If they say yes, you can leave. This applies across the board with law enforcement stops, is that you can always ask, am I free to leave? If they say yes, then you can leave the situation. This basically what you're forcing them to say is, essentially, am I under arrest, right? And they have to have a good reason to put someone under arrest or detain someone. So that's why by forcing them to give an answer, you're kind of making them decide. And if they don't have a good reason, then you can always say, you can always leave the situation after that. And everyone has the right to remain silent. This is something that's also common in all interactions with law enforcement. You can say that I want to remain silent. I don't consent to a search. You can say all of these things very clearly. It's always important to communicate very clearly. Say, I don't want to talk to you. I don't give you permission to search my car or my home or whatever situation you're in. So the goal is to just, stay calm, explain that you don't, want to exercise your rights in the situation, and yeah. Regarding schools, unfortunately, we've seen some ICE activity in schools. They're not like a complete safe place for people, but there are some protections. Schools generally don't allow ICE agents to come into them, or non-public areas without a judicial warrant. But they can still take action if they have lawful authority, and the schools are not able to block them. So if they have a warrant, if they're authorized, which generally they don't, but let's say hypothetically they did, the school would have to let them in. And New Jersey is trying to do some, create some additional guidance and maybe have more safe places like schools and other public buildings be free from any ICE activity. But this is still these regulations are still new and they're always changing. So the guidance right now is not very clear on what to do. But there's a lot of advocacy going on to try to make these places more safe from ICE, and a lot of bills that are being proposed for that purpose. The workplace is similar to other private places, right? They need either to enter it, they need either the consent or judicial warrant, but in this case, consent is from the business owner, right? So the business owner can give them permission, even if the workers don't want them to come. Unfortunately, if the business owner allows them to come, then they have permission. Sometimes we see in these situations when ICE comes in, a lot of people, their instinct is to just head out the back door, make a run for it, especially in these workplaces where there's a lot of maybe undocumented workers, people working under the table. Then a lot of them might just all at once head to the back door, start running. It's generally recommended not to do that because it can escalate the situation. It could possibly make things worse. Yeah.
Okay, you're in an alley, and there's like a bulldog at the end of it, and you're like eye to eye. It's like a wild dog, maybe has rabies or something. If you start running, what is it going to do? It's going to run after you. Yes, so same thing. If you run, they're going to run after you. They're going to tackle you. They're going to be like, what's going on? What are you doing?
Yeah, even though it's not evidence of any wrongdoing, right? Fleeing is not necessarily proof that you're doing something wrong, but a lot of times the officers think that it's evidence of wrongdoing, so then they just kind of go after you, and it might make things more difficult. So like with the other situations, if you're ever stopped by them, you can ask, am I free to go? Like in the other situations, you have the right to remain silent. And it's with all these situations, whether it's the school or the workplace, if you plan ahead of time with your co-workers, with your boss, or with your school, to just let them know, if ICE comes, what's the plan? What are we going to do? That kind of planning ahead of time might help the situation. If everyone's on the same page, that if ICE comes in, we're not going to let them in. That's always good, because then if someone accidentally is not on the same page and lets them in, then it could be a problem, and it could cause problems for other people. So if you end up being detained by ICE, all the right to remain silent that I've been mentioning throughout, that applies in this situation as well. So it's important to remain silent, because anything you say could be used against you, and that's what the Fifth Amendment of the Constitution was designed to protect. It was designed to give people the right to not say anything incriminating about themselves, because in the past, a lot of governments would, and governments still do this, but before the Constitution was written, they wanted to prevent governments from being able to force people into confessing, right? They wanted to prevent that from happening, and so that's kind of what this is all about. And you should ask for a lawyer, and that's why it's important to have a relationship with the immigration attorney before something like this happens. It's not the same thing as a criminal situation, where if you get detained, if you get sent to jail for a crime, if you don't have an attorney, they can provide you one without any charge. But in the immigration context, because it's a civil situation, not a criminal context, they don't provide you immigration attorney free of charge. You have to have a relationship with one on your own. You have to hire one, whether it's a private attorney that charges a fee, or maybe some legal services organizations that might provide these services for people who are low income or otherwise eligible for these like free or low cost representation. Either way, you have to find it on your own. They won't provide one for you. And yeah, you have to, if you're a immigrant, which this would apply to people who are non-citizens, you have a right to contact your consulate. You can inform ICE of any medical needs, and you can also request an interpreter if you're not very good at the English language. And you obviously, you have rights regardless of your immigration status. So no one can tell you, oh, because you're a non-citizen, you actually don't have the right to remain silent, or you actually don't have a right to an attorney. That's not true. Everyone has these rights. Everyone in the U.S. has these constitutional rights. So regarding best practices, it's always important to be prepared because that reduces any sort of panic in the situation. It's good to have a safety plan, carrying proof of status if that's applicable to you, memorizing phone numbers because sometimes they might take your phone from you, and then you won't have access to, or actually almost pretty much all the time, if you're in immigration detention, they're going to take your phone from you, so then you won't have access to your contact list. So it's better to memorize the phone numbers of important people, relatives, lawyers. Some people write it down on their hands or something like that, but memorizing is always better. Same with CBP. You shouldn't lie to any federal agents, any law enforcement. And sometimes they might give you a form to sign, right? They might say, okay, sign this, and really what it is you're giving up your status, or you're doing this or that. It's always best to just not sign anything without an attorney present. So you can always refuse to sign anything that they might make you sign. And again, it's important to stay calm because this will protect you in this situation. And this is something I mentioned before, but be mindful of who knows your status, who knows this information about you, because anyone who knows that you might have be undocumented for whatever reason, maybe your visa expired or whatever, someone might use this information against you. They might give it to ICE, and then ICE will know that you're undocumented, or that you're without status. So it's important to limit who knows this information, because that could always be used against you in the future. So these are just like a general recap. When you're faced with any law enforcement encounter, but particularly with ICE in this case, you always have the right to remain silent. This is the Fifth Amendment of the Constitution. You can always say, I invoke my right to remain silent. I don't want to speak with you. You have to say it. You can't just be mute. You have to actually say, I don't want to talk to you, and then you can stop talking, because then it makes it clear to them. It makes it very clear to them that you don't want to speak with them, and you're invoking your right. Never sign anything without speaking to an attorney. Always speak to an attorney whenever you encounter these situations, and have a relationship with them before something like this happens, so that you're not faced with any difficulty in the situation. And request a phone call. Right, you can contact your consulate, your attorney, or a relative. Yeah. And these are just some resources for anyone impacted by ICE raids. They can contact either of these phone numbers for assistance. They will often help connect people with immigration attorneys, with organizations that can help them in these situations. Okay. Should we do Q&A or get to? Okay. And we can answer any questions at this point because we're done with the Know Your Rights portion. Or we can also stay behind afterwards for any questions that people might have. So yeah, do you want to get into this? Or? Yeah.
So my question is, you mentioned about the travel. You mentioned about the travel, you talked about citizens and you talked about people with visas. What about people with green card? Do they have the same rights as a person in a citizenship? And the second question is ICE. And you talked about the masjid being the private property. Is it the building, or if we see anybody, ICE, in the parking lot, is that also not allowed?
So different statuses affect your situation differently. So a citizen, green card holder, or or someone without an immigrant visa, they all have different statuses, right? So a citizen has the right to enter the country. They have to let them in the country, right? They can't stop them from doing that. They can maybe delay you a few hours, but they have to let you in. Green card holder, you're supposed to be allowed to which green card essentially means you have an immigrant visa, right? And then other visas are called non-immigrant visas, like work visa, student visa, things like that. Both of those visas should be able to get you into the country. That's the whole point, is that a visa means that you have permission to enter the country, even though you're not a citizen. But unfortunately, they have a lot of discretion, at the airport to potentially, cancel your visa, to revoke it, if they suspect that you are, a threat to national security. Sometimes how that works is they, if you end up giving them your password, they look through your phone, you have a contact of someone who is on a watch list or something, then they'll be like, okay, this person's a risk to national security, let's cancel their visa, right? So that, unfortunately, that kind of thing can happen. It's not like, doesn't happen the majority of the time, but it's a risk. So it's important to know that anyone who's coming in with a visa, and a green card is a type of requires a type of visa, that your status could always change. It could always be revoked, and that's why it's we generally, the guidance that is generally offered, especially in this time of the Trump administration, is to avoid traveling so that you don't have any of these problems. But a green card holder is supposed to have more protections than someone with a non-immigrant visa. But yeah. Yes. So a parking lot or a place like that is a bit more of a gray area. If they enter it, you can always tell them, because it technically is private property, you can tell them to leave the private property, and they if they don't have consent or they don't have a warrant, they should comply with that. But generally doors, generally like for example the porch of a house or the walkway up until the door of a masjid, that's kind of like a different status, even though it's private property. Generally, it's the person who owns that place can expect people to come to the door without permission. Like, people who a mailman comes to the door, they don't ask for permission every time, but they do that anyway. Or someone coming door to door to sell something. Law enforcement is the same thing, right? So a law enforcement agent can come to the door even though it's, passing the property line. So they could come onto a parking lot, but if you tell them, we don't want you to be here, then that would give them notice that they should leave the situation, leave that private property. Yeah.
Jazakallah khair for the beautiful presentation and taking the time out and educating the community. I do have two questions. First, in regards to the thing that you mentioned about the watch list, I've seen instances where if your name matches or your first name matches with the names on the watch list, you are picked up, and that affects your domestic travel, not only international travel. How do we know if our name is on the watch list? Is there a website we can just go up and then check? And the second question that I have is, if at all ICE comes at your door, can you just not ignore and do your chores and not open the door and not interact with them?
Yeah, so regarding the watch list, a lot of times these government programs are very secretive. They don't want people to know who's on a watch list or who isn't on a watch list. The DHS trip complaint that I mentioned, it's supposed to be a way to let the government know that, I'm experiencing these problems. Can you let me know if I'm on a watch list? Maybe there's a mistake in identity. Maybe I have the same name as someone who's on a watch list. So perhaps you can fix that problem, and going forward, maybe I won't be affected. That could work. It could not work. It's never a guarantee to help you get removed from suspicion. A way that attorneys have used in the past to determine if you're on a watch list is they might do what's called a Freedom of Information Act request. So they will submit that FOIA request to the agency, like CBP, TSA, and maybe even FBI or another agency, to try to find out if any of the records that they have on you might indicate if you're placed on the watch list or not. And that also, could be successful. It may be not successful if they redact that information. But unfortunately, that's the nature of these watch lists, is that they tend to be very, they try very hard to not give away that information. So an attorney has to, or another organization advocating on your behalf would have to be really diligent and try different avenues to figure out, if you're on a watch list, and to hopefully try to get you removed from that watch list if possible. And there was another. Did I address both your questions, or was there another one?
There was another one. The other question was, can we just ignore eyes?
Oh yeah, ignoring them. Yeah. So you can, right? You can ignore them. That's possible. It would be. I personally think it'd be better to maybe go if your door has like a window or something like that, to talk to them maybe through the glass. Say, do you have a warrant? Why are you here? And then make them, ask them to produce it, and then say, if you don't have a warrant signed by a judge, I'm not going to let you in. And I don't want to speak. I don't want to answer any questions. I'm not interested in, and hopefully that back and forth, it might last a while. They might keep on pushing, but hopefully that will eventually end the situation. They'll realize that this person, knows their rights, and we may not want to mess with them, so that's something that's a strategy that I think is best, but you don't have to, answer the door. You're not required to do this.
So it's also better to speak through the door. They can hear you. It's better to not open the door, because what happens to some people is they don't vocalize their rights. They don't say, I don't consent to search. I don't want you coming in. They don't say that. They open the door a little bit. The agent steps in, and it's awkward, and then they come in, and they take that as implicit consent because you didn't say no, and you open the door. So it's better to talk to them through the door, and they could slip the paper under the door. There's no problem with that. Yeah, or on the window, and you can read it, right? We have a question in the front. Okay. We'll get back to you.
A lot of the time, especially as the question they say, are you American citizen? If you say yes, the second question came is, which country you born? If you are not white, which country you born? And if you give a name of a Middle East country or Afghanistan or any other country, then there's a question start one by one by one. So is there a requirement that you need to say which country you born, if you're naturalized or not? Or just say, I'm an American citizen, and that's it.
Yeah, so at any point, if you're stopped by ICE, you can always ask them, am I free to go? If they say, yes, you're free to go, that means you're not being detained. That means you can very calmly just walk away from the situation. You don't have to answer any questions. If they say you are not free to go, that means you're being detained. That means, that they're saying that we're going to arrest you. In which case, you also don't have to answer questions because you have a right to remain silent, right? So either way, you're not required to answer these questions. If you want, if you're a U.S. citizen and you want to just say, I'm a U.S. citizen, and especially if you have proof of it, like the passport that I mentioned, or passport card, if you want to do that as just to get them to stop messing with you, then maybe you want to do that just, strategically, but you can also just choose not to say anything, especially if you're not, just either way, whether you're being detained or not, you don't have to answer these questions. A lot of times they try to make you think that you're obligated to answer these questions, but really in most cases you're really not able. Yeah.
Sisters have a few questions. So one of the question.
The question was toward the CBP asking you if where were you born?
Yes, CBP shouldn't be asking those questions. If you're a U.S. citizen, you show your passport. That's it, right? They don't need to. And also, your passport would tell you, would mention where you're born, right? So they don't need to, ask those questions. And like I said, if they ask any questions beyond the purpose of your travel, you don't need. You can just say, I'm not comfortable answering the questions, and then,
Again, if you're a visa holder, it might be in your interest to answer some questions or filter them, because you're at their mercy if they're going to let you in or not, right? But otherwise, just say you're not comfortable answering these questions, or you don't have to volunteer this information. You don't have to get into it. A lot of people worry, they have anxiety, and they just kind of get into it. So don't need to answer that kind of stuff.
So one of the questions the sister had was, can you refuse to unlock your phone when they say you open it, or if you have already given it to them?
Yeah, so they can take your phone whether you give them permission or not, but you don't have to give them either you don't have to open it for them. You don't have to give the password to them. Especially if you're a U.S. citizen, you have the most protections. If you're not a U.S. citizen, they can't force you to give, for you to give. It's not like you haven't done anything wrong if you refuse to give them the password or you refuse to open it for them. But they might use it as a way to give you problems. So that's a more tricky situation. It just depends on your status. But generally speaking, you don't have to give them that or unlock it for them or give them any access.
So they also say, CBP says, they have every right to ask for it. Sure, go ahead. They can ask for the passwords, whatever. Doesn't mean you have to give it to them. They can take your stuff at the airport, right? So this is different. A police officer, an ICE agent can't just come up to you or come up to your house and start taking your stuff. It doesn't work like that, right? We have the Fourth Amendment protects us from unreasonable searches and seizures. But every search and seizure at a port of entry, like an airport these days, is reasonable. Why? Because it's all under the pretense of national security. Drugs, terrorism, crime, weapons, right? So at the airport, they can take your stuff no matter what. You don't need to give your password. Some people think, if I give them my password, they'll know I'm innocent and they'll let me go. Not necessarily. It actually could just make more problems for you.
We have another question here. So how do we identify ICE? So, you said they can conceal themselves, try to, hide as FBI agents or somewhere. So how do we identify them in public spaces, in the parking lots, or even at your home or in the car?
The quick question is that sometimes it's not possible to identify them because they try to hide their identity, but a lot of the time, they might be wearing a vest that says, police, ICE on the back. It might say HSI, which is the Homeland Security Investigations, or ERO, Enforcement and Removal Operations. Or if they don't have either of those things, they often look a bit suspicious, right? If there's like a group of people with a car that has like tinted windows and they're walking out, they all have masks on. It looks kind of suspicious. So you can, unfortunately, we've seen incidents of people, people like criminals doing this to pretend to be ICE because ICE has been doing a lot of these practices of concealing their identity, and that's like the unfortunate consequence of this practice that they're doing. But yeah, that's the general answer. Yeah.
And it goes on that we have a protected place in a private area in your own home or residence or in a building. What do we do if they stop us in the streets? Do we just say, no, I don't want to speak, or we just walk away?
Yeah, so if they stop you, you can always say, am I being detained? If they say, no, you're not being detained, you can calmly walk away from the situation. Say, I don't want to speak with you. That's it. If they are detaining you, they have to have a reason. And then, yeah, exactly. So, and then you can remain silent. So, yeah. And whether to talk to them is up to you. It's better not to talk to them. But if you want to just say, I'm a U.S. citizen, you can't do anything with me. If you want to show them the passport, that's fine. But that's basically the extent to which you have to interact with them.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Brother, I have a question regarding the post-ICE operation.
Yeah.
Let's say there are family members who came on green card, mother, father, sister, but the brother and another sister, let's say they are on student and they are caught by the ICE, and let's say they found something out of something to just get a reason to just deport them. So let's say got deported, and whether they can come back to visit their family, or they just post some limitations on the passport, or they just limit some years. that they cannot visit the US or some limitations, something like that? I have a question.
This is a complicated question because then, a lot of times if you were working with an immigration attorney that was, doing things properly, then, ideally all of those people, all the children of the people who are coming in with the green card would also be able to, have a green card, and so they would all come together. But in this situation, if, one family member gets deported, unfortunately deportation acts as a bar of re-entry to a certain extent, right? I think it's a certain number of years. I don't know the exact number of years, but unfortunately, when someone is deported, then there is that kind of barrier of being able to come back into the country for a certain extent of time, and so that's why it's best to try to prevent that from happening. Oftentimes, if you're living in the U.S. with your family, you have mother, father, siblings, then that could be used as a basis to prevent your removal, right? So an attorney can argue, this person's family, they need them, especially if they have kids or they have a wife that, needs them for support. They can be use that as a basis to prevent their removal. But this is all, enters into the realm of the work that an immigration attorney would do, and so that's why it would be best to speak with them about that kind of question. Yeah.
So basically, if somebody doesn't want to write family member's phone number on their hand, what should they do?
Yeah, they have to. It's best to remember the phone numbers. It's best to remember it, so in case you're detained, so that then you can just do it from your memory, right? So you don't have. Yeah.
So our young brother asked, if you can't write phone numbers on your hand, what do? Well, you have to memorize phone numbers of your spouse, right? Your immigration attorney, if you're not a citizen, you just have to memorize them. You memorize Quran, right? You got to do it. You got to do the same thing for a couple phone numbers. Yeah, fortunately.
Assalamu alaikum, brothers. We have one more final question, inshallah. What is reasonable for us to information for us to withhold in the airports? So, for example, if they take us aside, are we just, as soon as they take us, are we allowed to say, I seek my Fifth Amendment right, or do we have to disclose certain information? And if what, which ones are we allowed to? So, for example, my address, my age, or any other of those information, which ones do we withhold and which one do we not withhold?
So technically, a U.S. citizen does not have to say anything to them because they have a right to enter the country. But it's not wise to do that, because if they say, "Where were you? What were you doing?" and you keep your mouth shut, then they'll be like, "Okay, this person's trying to hide something. It's suspicious." So it's best to answer questions related to your travel. If it's not related to your travel, if it has nothing to do with your traveling, like if it's asking about your political opinions, what masjid do you go to, what kind of Muslim are you, how many do you pray 5 times a day, things like that. If they ask all these questions, you could say, I'm not comfortable answering that doesn't have anything to do with my travels. If you're a non-citizen, you have to tell them about your status, you have to tell them about your travels, you have to do these things, because otherwise they could very easily use that as a basis to not let you in the country if you're hiding that from them. But yeah, so if it's related to the travel, answer it, where'd you go, what was the purpose of your travels, things like that. If it's not related, say I'm not comfortable answering that question and whatnot. Yeah.
We actually get this a lot, right? So I'll just restate simply. Questions you should answer. Who are you? Identify yourself. Where are you coming from? Where are you going? What's the purpose of your travel? What do you have with you? Customs. Right? They have a right to ask about, what do you have with you? What are you carrying? What do you bring into the country? And what is your immigration status? Right? Are you a citizen? What are you? You have a green card, visa? Give us your documentation. After that, I'm not comfortable answering that. Right? And they start asking about your friends, politics, religion. Don't answer those questions. They may hold you for a few hours. It's better to have sabr and not risk making more problems for yourself or your family.
we'll stay.
Jazakumullah khairan, Brother Dyaa and Brother Ramin. This was great, very informative. I think if we don't stop, the questions will continue probably all night, inshallah. It looks like it. So Jazakumullah khairan for this, and we'll continue to ask you more and other times. Brothers are going to be here. We would so if anybody has any questions, they are going to stay here. We are about to serve dinner, so please everybody move to the side so they can spread the tarp, and then you can ask questions later on, inshallah.
I wanted to ask you, I have the schedule. If you are here during Ramadan for fundraising and stuff.
Inshallah. Jazakallah khair. Yeah.